Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Lorna Schumann from the Illinois State Museum, and today we're at the Research and Collections Center. And we're going to go behind the scenes and see a piece that not everybody gets to see. We're going into the Osetology Lab, which is about bones. And we're going to look a little bit more and see what actually happens with bones when they come in. Are you ready? Come on, let's go. Come on. Hi, Terry.
Good morning, Lorna.
How are you today?
I'm very good.
Well, great. I'm here with a bunch of students, and we're learning and visiting the Osetology Lab. So I would really like if you could show us what goes on here. And students, this is Dr. Terry Martin, and he's going to share with us a bit more about why all these bones are out here.
Well, we've got some material I'm working on from Fort Kaskaskia, which is a site down in southern Illinois. And this was an American fort, but before that it was a French colonial fort. And these are archaeological deposits and fragments of bones from 3 different contexts. And I'm just trying to get a rough idea of what kind of species, what kind of animals we're looking at here, and what they were using for diet, and furs, and what other products that they were using the animals for. So what we're doing, and first of all, looking at some of these, would go to our collections here, and we do all our identifications using reference collections from our museum. And these are known animals, known species, known ages, known location, and we use these whole bones to identify the fragments like this. For example, this is a deer tibia. This is a hind leg, one of the middle portions of the hind leg from a deer. And this is a good match for white-tailed deer. But I'm seeing some other things here that are other animals besides deer. For example, I'm seeing this over here, which is an ulna, and we would match this up with a pig, domestic pig. So in addition to wild animals, we know we've got domestic animals here as well. And here we've got, in this case, pig. And this one's smaller than what our reference material is. And then also looking at the case here, I'm seeing a scapula. Now, this is a shoulder blade, and it's kind of small, but it has the same shape as cattle. And in this case, a calf. And this would be a left scapula from a calf. And the difference between a calf and an adult cattle, you can see by the size, but it's basically the same kind of shape. So we know we've got pig, we've got cattle, we've got deer, and then I'm seeing other fragments here. Now this is more challenging because it's a large fragment, but it is still a fragment. And there are some signs on here, things, the shapes and everything to look at, that this looks like it is cattle as well. And that's a femur, upper hind leg. And this is a distal end, and it looks like this is the opposite side. So this is a right, this would be a left. And we can see some of the really subtle things here. This little fossa, a little dip, but otherwise the shape is identical to this.
So Terry, what's a distal?
So distal would be, proximal is closer to the center of the body and distal is farther away. And so these terminologies, proximal, distal, medial, lateral, these are all things that we use to make a description of the bone, so that when we enter that onto our information tag here, then that information will get entered into a computer, and when all this is entered, we can summarize everything and the details. For example, we can see if there's 2 bones from the same side of the body and they're both proximal ends, we know that's 2 individual animals instead of just 1. So that's another piece of quantification that we would be using.
Cool.
So we have a lot of fragments here in different parts of the body, and some of these will be more identifiable than others, but it's just a matter of going through and matching and eliminating different species. And here again, in this other unit that from the same site, here's another piece of deer tibia. It's the opposite side of the one that we had in this unit. And it shows up really well here. And then another challenge we see with some of these bones are burned, whereas some are unburned. And then I've noticed some rodent gnawing on some of these that shows that rodents had been chewing on them. So that all goes into making interpretations about the site and the occupation at the site.
So why would a bone be burned?
Well, it used to be the simplistic interpretation of that was that bones were burnt because, of course, if you're cooking the meat, the bone's going to get burnt. But actually, most often when you're cooking the meat, the meat isn't burnt that severely. So a lot of times what's happening here is this is refuse. After all the meat is off, and they might have been, it could have been accidentally or it could have been on purpose, where they dumped this into a fire to just get rid of their refuse. Trash burning, basically.
Cool.
But there are different degrees of burning, and so that would show different behaviors there, or different ways of disposing of the refuse. And then a lot of them isn't burned at all. So so the cooking thing doesn't really hold up as a general interpretation. But some of these things are really fragmented, and have to do some more work on these, but we can see from some of the teeth on these how worn some of these are. That this is quite an old individual cow here that we have represented here by all these pieces that I can see we can refit together.
So how does all this information really help you understand pieces of the archaeological site? Like, what does it do?
Well, this helps us understand the behavior and the economic behavior. Some of these sites might be, especially the early French, they might not have had that many domesticated animals, and so most of the wildlife that they were going after would have been wildlife, and so a lot more deer, larger proportions of wild animals, fish, birds. And then if it's a site where they were dependent on agriculture, then we will find a greater proportion of cattle, pigs, and chickens even. So all this goes into helping us to interpret, along with the artifacts and the architectural remains of the site, what life was like at that particular site at that particular time.
Kind of like a snapshot in time.
Right, right. So no one piece of data gives you all the answers, but all together gives you a better picture of an archaeological site.
Very cool, Terry. Anything else you want to show us?
Well, this is all I've got set out here. If we had more fish on this site, that's a much more challenging thing, is to identify fish bones. But that, like I said, that's much more complicated. There's more species and more variability in the bones from fish, as you can imagine if you're thinking about a bass versus something like a sturgeon or a bowfin or a gar, so that those have different architectures in their bones.
Cool. Well, Terry, thank you so much for spending time with us today and really helping us to get to understand why archaeologists study all these old bones and how they really help us understand different ways of how people lived back in time. Do you ever find that you get to use it for more modern?
Oh yes, the same procedure goes through with, for example, if a coroner calls us or police, if they discover bones and they're not sure if they're human or not. And so they want to make sure, of course, they're human. So, so we will use the same approach to identifying bones that are brought in or found in a field or something like that.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time today. And I want to thank all of you also for spending time with us today. Thanks.